Okay, rolling and action. So welcome to, I don't exactly remember the name of the class, but something about handstands, strength and methodology and technique. So basically the idea behind this class, it's a bit more theoretical, but feel free to practice as you do and try to find your own restrictions. It's this idea of why can't you do a handstand? And even though we're talking specifically about handstands, the way I try to teach is that I want it to go beyond handstands. I want you to be able to take these concepts and apply them to anything you learn. Handstand is just one skill, and it's a good example of a skill that has many different components, which is why I like to use it, and it's something that I personally have a lot of experience with. I'm not the kind of teacher who has to talk about the experience that I have, but let's say I've done enough to say that everything that every piece of advice that I offer, I have a reason behind it. And I also encourage you to question it and to take it with a grain of salt and not to accept it as a fact, but to ask enough questions until you can take that concept and apply it to your own practice, or not apply it, because some of the stuff I say may not apply to you. So it's important to kind of have that critical eye. So it's this idea, why can't you, or why can't people in general do a handstand? And if you are, so I'm going to give a couple of practical exercises in this class. So if you want to do it during the class, I recommend wall space, floor space. That's it. Be safe. Don't do anything that you're not comfortable doing. I'm going to talk about how to build comfort. But getting back to that, it's this idea that you have to ask yourself, I want to do this. Why can't I do that thing? What are the elements that are preventing me from doing that thing? And then you can understand what to actually work on and how to actually formulate your own learning process. Because a lot of people, like using handstand as an example, you see this all the time in the CrossFit world, in the yoga world, where people do the same exact thing for years. I'm not trying to talk shit, but people do the same exact thing for years and they make zero progress. Now, handstand does take time. You're not going to learn it in one day, in one seminar, in one workshop, but to not make progress in years is also questionable. And it's this idea that they don't break it down into what's actually missing from their practice. They just keep trying the same thing over and over again. And understanding where your actual weak point lies and what you're missing is really important. And we have three main factors that I'm talking about. It's all a generalization. When you really get down to the individual level, there's overlap and there's some more complex elements. So everything I say is a complete generalization. This is meant to kind of reach a wider audience. I don't know how many people are listening, but hopefully enough that it's what I would consider a wide audience. So three different elements. We have physical, technical, and psychological. And the reason that you're not able to do the skill is usually going to be because you're lacking in one of those three. So the physical is your actual body is not prepared for it, right? Meaning, let's use handstand as an example. I'm going to use an analogy really quick. But first, handstand, maybe your shoulders aren't strong enough to support the weight. Now that kind of overlaps with technical because a lot of people don't use the technique to hold themselves in a way that uses less strength, but there is a base level of strength required, base level of upper body strength. It is less than what people think. Like I actually got this message a couple of days ago saying, oh, I can't even do one push-up. Like, is there any hope to learn a handstand? Yeah, because you don't actually even need to do one push-up to learn a handstand. But is it helpful? Yes. So the physicality is, to me, actually the most boring part of the developing somebody's practice because there's no hacks, right? You can't, well, without taking steroids or whatever, you have to build an adaptation in the body. So you can't just get stronger overnight. That's going to take time. And in a lot of people's handstand practice, they may just have to do a physical conditioning for a couple months in order to be able to perform the technique. And that's a reality of not everyone's practice, but some people's practice. So to me, that's the most boring because I can fix somebody's technique in a day sometimes, right? I can help somebody overcome their psychological barriers, again, sometimes in a day, sometimes no, sometimes months, but strength, you can't. There's no way to hack it. So before I get ahead of myself, because I'm kind of underslept and overcaffeinated right now, we get into the technique. So if you're physically capable of doing a skill, The reason maybe you can't do it is just lack of practice, lack of specific things that you have to understand and know how to do, which probably takes specific practice to do. So that's a matter of making mistakes, refining them, making different mistakes, and then following along that path until you find a way to make it easy. And the technique and strength, not with every skill, but with handstand, I do try to see it that way. I think of them as kind of separate entities. Like the better your technique is, the less strength you need, right? And you can be quite weak and quite deconditioned, honestly, and still do a lot of high-level handstand tricks if you understand the technique and the bone structure and how to hold yourself, but you're not going to learn that technique the first day, right? That comes also from months or years, depending on the level of skill, of making mistakes and understanding how to overcome them. And coaching, of course, helps. And then psychological. This one to me is the most interesting because you have the physical capacity to do the skill, and then you have a basic understanding of the technique of how to do it, so why can't you do it? Something mentally is holding you back. Maybe it's fear, maybe it's perception, like what you perceive is happening in the skill is not actually what's happening. Maybe you're thinking too much, maybe you're taking too much setup, and maybe you're not thinking enough, but that's the mental barriers, and that's a huge part of it because a lot of people think of, again, I'm just using handstand, but this is literally every skill. People think of handstand as this physical element. Oh, I'm not strong enough. And that's the first thing they see, and that's like their main reason, I'm not strong enough. Most people, again, I have enough experience teaching a skill over like 15 years and most of the continents in the world. Most people who say they're not strong enough are strong enough. It's technique and psychology holding them back. A lot of times they're scared to fall over. A lot of times they're scared to be upside down because they haven't been there. A lot of times they're scared to just hold themselves up. Or maybe it's not even fear. Maybe it's just uncertainty. Like they don't know what's going to happen because they haven't experienced it yet. And naturally, the body wants to be in comfort, stasis. So you don't seek that discomfort. And then sometimes it's the other way around. People have not enough fear and they chuck themselves, they throw themselves into that move, and then maybe later it builds fear because they've hurt themselves. But anyway, there's this idea that you can have the technical understanding and you can have the physical prerequisites and still not be able to do the skill because something mentally is holding you back. And that's either the most simple or the most complex barrier to cross, depending on the person. Again, some people, I can help them get over the fear in a few minutes, and some people it might take a couple months, and that depends, again, on the person, on their perception, on so many things. So before we get into the practical part of the class, I want to use one analogy, and I like this analogy a lot because it is simple, is I'm throwing a ball. So we're going to get into the technical, psychological, and physical restrictions of throwing a ball. So this is my task. I have a ball or whatever, and I have this target in front of me, and I want to throw the ball and hit the target. So strength, in this case, it's not really strength, but it's the physical prerequisite, is I need the connective tissue in my arm to be strong enough and resilient enough to get that snap that I can throw the ball far enough. So it's distance. So the distance of how far I throw, that's the physical. How do I learn to throw further? Specific drills, specific strength conditioning, building more flexibility in the arm, building strength in the right places, working on the rotators, that takes time. So just being able to throw the ball further. If I can't reach the target, obviously the technique doesn't matter if I can't even throw the ball far enough to hit the target, right? So technique, that's going to be the accuracy. That's going to be what do I need to do within my own body? What calibrations do I need to make? When do I let go of the ball? What calculations do I need to make to hit that target? And that's something, in order to be able to do that, in order to hit the target, I'm going to have to miss it a bunch of times, right? That's just how it goes. So that's the technical progression. So how is it going to go? I'm strong enough that I can throw the ball far enough and hit that target. If I wanted to, I throw and I miss. Why did I miss? Okay, the ball went right. So I'm going to adjust my aim to the left. And then when I do that, I throw again, and then I have this feedback loop, and that's technique. That's working technique, meaning that I'm making a mistake. I'm trying to understand why I made that mistake. I'm trying to make the corrective motion or make a different mistake. And eventually, okay, I adjusted my aim left, I went too far left. So now I'm gonna adjust a half, we'll call it clicks, even though we're not setting up sights, but I go a half click, and then, okay, now I'm too high. So now I aim downwards. And it's this idea that every time I make a mistake, I adjust for that mistake until I get this accuracy, right? So that's how you get better at technique. You make mistakes and you understand how to correct those mistakes until you're not making those mistakes. Now, psychology, right? Is it scary to throw a ball? Probably not. But now let's consider a couple of psychological restrictions for this scenario. Maybe you had a past shoulder injury, right? So you're trying to protect your shoulder because you're not confident in using it, and you're not throwing as hard as you want to. You're throwing like this or something like that. You're cutting off your technique and you're not using your power because you're trying to overly protect your shoulder for whatever reason. And then the ball is not going far enough. The ball is not hitting your target. That's one. Number two is maybe you've just never thrown a ball that hard in your life. And even though you can, you're not sure what's going to happen. So you're still cutting yourself short. Maybe another psychological, not restriction, but it is that you don't know how to hold back your power. And you go 100% every time, so much that you could tear your shoulder because you're going too hard. That's not a psychological restriction per se, but it's a psychological factor, is not going hard enough, but also not knowing how to hold back your power because it's a technique. The point is not to throw the ball as far as possible. The point is to throw the ball and hit that target. And that may not be using 100% of your strength. And ideally, in terms of technique, you want to use the minimal amount of work, the minimal amount of force. So if it only takes me 50% of my maximum power to hit this target in front of me, that's all I want to use. I don't need to use 75 to hit 50. So it's another factor. Here's another psychological factor. This kind of coincides with fear of falling in a handstand, which I'll talk about. Let's say you're throwing the ball, but it's not a target, it's a net. And if you hit this net, it's going to bounce the ball back at you. And you don't know with what speed, and you don't know your reaction. So you're afraid that if you throw and hit this target, the ball is going to come back into your face and smack you in the face. So what are you going to do? You're going to not consciously, but subconsciously sabotage yourself by missing on purpose because you're afraid of that ball coming at you. And you know that if you miss, if you don't throw hard enough, that's not going to happen, even though you're not achieving your goal, even though you're not hitting your target. So went a little bit into a lot of detail, but it's a simple idea. And here I'm talking about why can't you do it? Why can't you throw the ball and hit this target? And then you can figure out which one are you and what do you actually need to work on. So let's go back to this ball throwing analogy before moving on to handstands. So we talked about how to overcome the physical and the technical restrictions. How about the psychological? You have to build comfort. You can't be uncertain of yourself. You have to understand that you're not going to hurt yourself doing it. You have to know that you have the reflex to catch the ball if it comes back at you. You have to know your shoulder well enough to know how much force you can produce and still be safe. And that also takes experience, but it also takes sometimes slipping into that realm of discomfort, maybe getting closer to the target and letting the ball bounce back and catching it, and you build that reaction of catching it until you're confident enough that, like, hey, I'm not worried about this ball hitting my face, so I don't have to hold myself back. I can hit the target with enough power, use my precision, and if the ball comes back at me, it's cool because I can catch it. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight. I'm checking the comments. Doesn't look like there are any. So again, it's just my teaching style. I go into a lot of theoretical because I don't want to just give you an exercise to do. I want you to understand why. And I want people to ask questions because that's one of my issues with the fitness world and a lot of techniques is it's like, this is gospel. This is the word. This is the way. You do not question it. Why is it the way? Because it's how I was taught. And then it's like generations and generations of not questioning what you're doing until the point is that you never even understand why the technique was created in the first place. So I don't want to get too deep into that angle. Sometimes you have to keep me a little bit on topic with the stuff I'm talking about. But question the technique, understanding the different elements of the process. So let's go into the handstand. So what are the prerequisites of doing a handstand? I'm going to keep it really simple. Can you put your arms above your head? Can you put your arms above your head? If you can, doesn't have to be like this, doesn't have to be this super crazy shoulder angle, you don't have to be super flexible. Can your arms go above your head? If the answer is yes, you can probably figure out some form of handstand. You can probably already do some kind of handstand training. Now, in the ideal situation, we want a vertical line with the arms. We want elbows pressed straight. We want the arms vertical in a line with the body. That takes a bit more flexibility, and I'll show you some exercises to work on that. But as long as you can put your arms above your head and you're comfortable staying there, you can start with your handstand training, right? If your arms only go to here, whatever issues you may have, maybe handstands aren't what you want to do yet. Maybe you want to work on that first. Like I worked with a guy who had a frozen shoulder in both shoulders, and when I met him, his arms are going to here. So we were working on handstands? No, we didn't start working. He was working towards the handstand, but it took him some years to be able to get his arms overhead. And that's just, again, one case. That may not be the case with you, but the point is that you do have to address the physicality first. The second is the wrist. So that's actually going to be a big one, and there is a technical correlation to that as well, right? So you do have to have strong enough wrists in order to hold your weight on them. And there is a technical element as well, like if you hold yourself in a specific way, it's less pressure on the wrist, and that way is counterintuitive, which is a technical part of the handstand. But that being said, if you don't have experience, like if you haven't put weight into your hands, if you don't, at least be able to hold like a plank position or crawl around on the floor, you're going to want to spend time developing your wrists. That doesn't mean you shouldn't start handstand training until your wrists are massively thick or anything like that. I don't like this idea of waiting until you have permission to do the skill. I don't give permission. You have permission to do whatever you want. But the point is that if you don't respect this, that is a potential risk of injury or a potential risk of pain. So you do want to respect that the body does have to create some sort of adaptation to be safe doing the handstands. The wrist, the reason I'm talking about the wrist is because the shoulders, it's going to be mainly the traps, the upper traps holding you up in the handstand, depending on a few things. So these are muscles. Muscles adapt fast enough, depending on the person. In the wrist, it's a lot more tendon and bone and connective tissue. So the reason the wrists are important is because they hold your whole body weight, and there's not really muscle in there. And all of the stuff that's in the wrist joint specifically takes a lot longer to build. So it might take, and again, it's just something to consider, it might take a month or two to build up your shoulder strength to be able to have decent technique in the handstand. It might take 6 months to 2 years to properly, again, I'm just throwing numbers out there, to properly build up your wrist to be able to handle higher volume of handstand. So just respect that your wrists are going to adapt a lot slower. So I'm going to show you just a couple exercises that you can get into to kind of assess yourself and understand if you're lacking some of the physical elements of the handstand. So the first one, this is going to use the wall. This is not a very intense exercise. It's kind of a diagnosis, but it's also a really powerful active flexibility exercise in itself. So again, first, just arms overhead, right? Can you put your arms above your head? But what we really want to get like a proper, that's in quotes because who knows what proper is, but to get a proper handstand form, here's the exercise. I have my feet, I know they're not in frame. It's hard to get the right frame when I got no camera operator, so that looks like a decent frame. Feet are about a foot from the wall, about a 1/3 meter for the metric system users. So I'm going to flatten my back to the wall. So what's going to happen is right now my lower back is coming off. That's completely normal. I'm going to make my body so that my whole back is flat against the wall and I can't put my hand underneath it. So that's going to turn off this compensation of using the back to cheat shoulder movement. And then what I'm going to do is just try to get my arms as close as I can to vertical. So this is the ideal flexibility that we're looking for to be able to do like a nice straight line handstand. You don't have to be able to do this to do a lot of high level handstand variations, but that's the drill. That's the test. So, and for me, if you can do it with no warm up, it's even better. Like I said, I was on 2 movie shoots yesterday. I got back at 4 in the morning, couple hours of sleep, bit of caffeine, good to go. So with 0 warm up, 0 movement, my shoulders are such, and part of that, it's not just flexibility, it's confidence. I can do it because I know I can do it because I've done it however many times before. But having that confidence to get your arms in a completely straight line to the back, that's the ideal. So if you can do this, then you're good on shoulder flexibility. You don't really need to get your shoulders more flexible for the handstand unless you're doing more advanced variations. Other ways, like if you hang from a bar regularly, it's going to help open up your shoulders. You know, just doing some stretches against the wall. I can easily give a few hours workshop just on shoulder stretches for handstands, but this is going to be the biggest indicator for me. Can you get your arms vertical without opening your chest and your back, without letting the arms bend and go wide? And you just get as close as you can. And where are you, right? Are you here? Are you here? Are you here? It's the way that your arms go is also something you can assess, because if your arms stop here, okay, maybe I just need to work this motion. If your arms have a tendency to go wide, maybe it's your lats that are tight, and this motion is good for you, like these kind of stretches. So that's an exercise to be able to, again, assess yourself in terms of flexibility and can you hit the handstand position. So number 2, we're going to get into wrist and shoulder strength for the handstand. And these are very simple, very basic drills. The point is that you don't have to be that strong. If you can do these basic movements, then the handstand is mostly technical. But if you have trouble doing these basic movements, it's helpful to address them. But when I teach a handstand class, I don't think of it as a conditioning class. I think of it as a technique class with some conditioning, but a lot of teachers will treat it just like only as a conditioning class. It's not wrong. I just think technique is more interesting than conditioning from my own perspective as a teacher, because I got to keep it interesting, right? I've been teaching for a long time. So basic push-up position, right? So the shoulders are very important. So if you let your shoulders sag, your body's naturally going to collapse. So what you want to try to do is push against the gravity with your shoulders. In the handstand, obviously, it's going to be a different angle. But the point is, in the push-up, it's not the arms that need to be strong, because my arms are straight. I want my elbows as straight as I can get them, so it's the bone structure that's holding my arms. So what muscle is actually holding my body up? Well, in the push-up position, it's going to be this stuff in the front, right? The pecs, the serratus, the lats do some work as well. In the handstand position, it's going to be a lot more upper traps, this push. So this is the muscle that's actually holding you up. People think of it as arm strength. It's arm strength if you do this, but that's not a good technique. That's a technique that forces you to use more strength to the point that you're going to tell yourself that you're not strong enough when you're actually not using the technique that makes you not have to be that strong. So really simple, right? Push-up position. So collapse, so you feel the difference, and then shrug. For the purpose of this drill, you're going to shrug up as high as you can. Now look at the angle of my arms. So my arms are completely perpendicular to the floor, completely vertical. If I'm leaning back, like, try to get a good angle like this, I'm not putting weight into my arms, I'm putting weight into my feet. That's not going to help the strength. So I want the arms completely vertical, and then push. And then you can work progressions of that. I'm going to use the wall, but I want to get into psychology a little bit later, so you don't have to use the wall. But you can do the same thing, just elevating the hips, right? So here's my push-up position. What if I take my butt up higher? I'm just holding myself with straight arms, and it's the shoulders doing the work. Now, when I take my hips higher, the load shifts from the pecs, to the delts, to the traps. But it's just this idea of, can I hold myself there? Can I hold weight in my arms? And even though I am building strength, I also want to think of how can I make it as easy as possible while still leaning weight into my arms? Because when you're doing any of these foot-supported drills, this is really important, and this is actually part of, again, the technique in psychology, because it's all connected. There's a lot of overlap. I say make it easy. What's the natural way to make a push-up position easy? If you've ever coached kids, how do they do push-ups? They go like that. We lean the weight into the feet. It's easier, but you're not actually doing the movement. You're not actually building strength. So make it easy and hard at the same time. That's a bit of a paradox, but you want to make sure when you're just doing these basic drills, put weight into your hands, arms vertical. Now, I don't want to just have basic strength. I want to be actually stronger than I have to be. I always want to have a surplus, always want to have a deficit. So with the push-up position, what I'm going to do is just take one arm off. Can I hold my weight with one arm and still maintain that shoulder position? If I can do that, if I can hold myself on one arm, it's easy to hold myself on two arms. And one of the other reasons I like the one arm is because it forces technique, it forces position. Because I can hold myself in a push-up position like this for a long time. I get to one arm with a collapsed shoulder and a bent elbow, that gets way, way, way harder. But if I have a lockout and I shift, it's not really that much harder, just a little bit. So again, these are basics, basic movements that if you can do them, you're probably strong enough to do a handstand. We're going to do a couple others. The wrist. So I don't want to go into my whole wrist sequence, but that does exist online in a couple of courses that I have, a bunch of YouTube videos you can search. I've put out a lot of information on wrists. So the wrist flexibility, if you're doing handstands on floor, which I do encourage because floors, you always have a floor, right? Unless you're in 0G. So this is the position you're going to be holding yourself in. The arm vertical to the floor, so the wrist is at 90 degrees. So some people say that you need a 90-degree active wrist extension. I've never had that, even when I didn't do handstands, when I was skinnier, when I played piano. So this is fine, right? Can you put weight in your hand and make a 90-degree angle with the wrist? If not, if you're feeling compression, if you're feeling tension, either you're going to have to work a little bit more on your wrist, or you're going to have to modify your technique to be able to do that. So 90 degrees at the wrist. If you're doing handstands on floor, pretty important. But as I mentioned, we don't just want 90 degrees. We don't want the technique to be at the limiting point, because you're not going to build confidence if you're at the edge of what you can do. You're not going to be confident. So this is what we want. Again, very basic exercise. Fingers facing forward, elbows straight. I'm going to lean forward. I'm going to lean forward until I feel a bit more pressure on the wrist, maybe a bit of compression in the front. I don't want to take it too intense, but I want to know that, try to get a little bit closer to the camera. I want to know that if this is where I'm doing my handstand, that I have a deficit, that I have enough wrist flexibility that I can go further than that if I need to, because it's much easier to build confidence in technique when you're not at your extreme, when you're not at your end range of something. So the wrist flexibility, I'm not going to tell you right now how to work on it, because again, I want to keep the focus. This is just an hour workshop. I'm used to doing 12 hours, like, a full weekend seminar, and still don't cover everything that I want to about a handstand. I like to get very detailed, but very basic. Just lean forward. You can be relaxed about it, right? Just leaning. And then two other things you can do here. So the first thing I'm going to do is do a counter contraction. What do you call that? I don't know. There's a name for it. I don't have names right now. You're going to push against it. So the wrist is going to go into deep extension, and you're going to push into flexion, just a static isometric hold. So you're engaging the flexors of the forearm and wrist. And relax. And then you're going to do the same thing in extension. So I don't know how visible that is, but I want to also make sure that I have access to my wrist extensors. Now this one I do feel because my wrists are not warmed up right now. So the extensors, I do feel a bit more of that compression. So take it slow if you're not used to these exercises. Go a lot slower than me. Get more sleep and drink less coffee. But so you can see what's happening with that arm. See how I'm pulsing my wrist extensor? So I'm activating my wrist extensor in the end range. That's important because if we get into balancing the handstand, you want to have these fine movements of the hands available to you even at the end range of the wrist. Take your time building up the wrist. What I recommend, just keep it really simple. I have videos. You can do a very thorough wrist warm-up. I recommend, in general, for your handstand practice, maybe the first 1 to 2 years, depending on your level of physicality going into it, don't skimp on the wrist warm-up. Every time you train, do a good wrist warm-up for 1 to 2 years, because even if you don't think you need it, you're helping this joint to get developed and more resilient in different angles, and that's going to help a lot more the long term of your practice. So that's my general recommendation. The first 1 to 2 years of your handstand, do a good wrist warm-up. I don't care if you feel like you need it or not, just do it anyway. It shouldn't take that long, a few minutes. Again, I have a lot of extra. You can check, maybe I'll put a link in later. I have a Vimeo series where I go into a lot of different wrist exercises. You don't have to use all of them. Like pick a couple of favorites. But you do have to be regular with that because, as I mentioned, the wrists are going to respond a lot slower to physical stress than the shoulders will. So like if you do, handstands are pretty low injury risk for the most part. But there is a potential, and most handstand injuries are going to be involving the wrists, so that's something you do have to take care of. And it, again, depending on your level of physicality, it may take some time. So continuing onward, now we're going to get into, and I talked about strength, but I also mentioned technique because it's like this idea that push-up position, strength, this is strength. I hold myself inefficiently. This is technique. I hold myself efficiently. The strength required is a lot less, but it's more focused. So it overlaps, as I mentioned. The better your technique is, the less strength you need. And this is really interesting, not only in handstands, but just talking about skill work in general. You will probably learn better technique if you're weaker, because you have to. Because if you're strong, you know how to overcompensate, and you're probably going to use that compensation because you have it, right? If you're strong enough in a handstand to hold yourself here, guess what? This is a lower center of gravity. It's easier to find your balance here, but it's a lot heavier on the shoulders. So it's a sacrifice you make. Whereas somebody who's not naturally strong in the upper body is actually more likely to find a good locked out handstand position because it's a necessity, because they can't hold it any other way. They don't have that option to fall back to. So it's an interesting thought how people think like, oh, being strong is an advantage. Well, sometimes being weak is an advantage, because what happens if you're too strong, you can learn a lot of bad habits. And then bad habits are really hard to correct over the long term. And again, an interesting thought, I never delved into sports acro, but I've trained with a lot of people who have. The sports acro, they do a lot of like partner hand balancing, stuff like that. And one of the theories that I heard when they were training bases, because the idea is it's all about structures. So you see the sports acro bases, they're fit, but they're not big. They're thicker than the flyers, obviously, but they're not like these massive, dudes or girls. And the theory that I heard, which I thought was super interesting, is that they don't want somebody who's naturally strong to come in as a base because they're harder to teach. They want someone who's not strong. They teach them the technique first, and then after they learn the technique, they get them strong. And that's a lot easier long-term to develop an athlete to do what they want compared to someone who has natural strength, where they're more likely to learn bad technique from the get-go, and then you have to do a lot of extra work to break those habits that come from having that natural strength. So interesting thoughts, really interesting. I want to do one more kind of strength exercise, but it's also gonna start to overlap into technique and psychology. So, okay, you're holding your push-up position. Get comfortable getting your hips higher.
because as I mentioned, it changes the musculature, right? When you get your hips up, you can put your butt against the wall like this. Most important, again, is that I'm not leaning back on the wall, that I have my weight in my arms. The feet, anytime you're using a foot support with the goal of not using the feet, you want them to be as light as possible. You want to do as little effort with the foot as you can, because the natural thing to do is lean into your support. It's an artificial support. You don't have that in a freestanding handstand, so you don't want to get used to using that. That's another psychological restriction, is the idea of having protection. Like, I've seen this actually happen a lot of cases. Not super beginner, but I've seen this happen, right? So we learn balance. We use the wall as an aid for balance. And what happens is somebody gets to the point that they can balance next to the wall quite well. So say, okay, take it freestanding. There's literally no difference in the technique. And all of a sudden they can't balance because the wall's not next to them. But they weren't physically touching the wall, they were just next to it. So it's like this idea, again, another potential psychological restriction of having that assistance and getting used to the extra safety net. And this is like going a little bit on a tangent. I used to coach gymnastics, and a lot of flips that people learn usually use a hands-on spotter. So I'm going to help flip somebody, make sure they're safe, make sure they don't land on their head. And then what happens is they get to the point that they're doing the flip by themselves, but as soon as the spotter steps away, like, oh, I can't do it anymore. Why can't you do it? You weren't getting physical assistance in the first place. And it's an interesting thought, like when I teach somebody a backflip, I have about 12 spotting progressions that I use, and about 5 of those are no contact spot. Meaning I can spot someone for a backflip in about 5 different ways where I intentionally don't touch them, but I try to make them feel psychologically safe while weaning away this idea of relying on an artificial safety. It's super, we're not getting to psychology yet, but it's super interesting. And this is why I like teaching handstands, because there's a lot of shit going on, man. Okay, this exercise is a very important exercise I'm going to show you. This is kind of the epitome of strength and technique. So if you can do a few rounds of this, you're good to go as far as physical prerequisites. You don't have to get stronger for most basic handstand drills, unless you get into like press or handstand push-up, anything more advanced. So for basic handstand, if you can do this, you have all of the strength that you need. So here's the exercise. You start in a push-up position. You go as high as you're comfortable. You're going to walk the feet up. You're going to walk the hands in, one hand at a time. Be very clear with your steps, as high as you can go. You hold the handstand for a moment, and then you walk back down with control, breathing the whole time. That's it, right? If you can do that with straight arms, and you can hold yourself for a second or two on one arm, you're good. That's as strong as you need to be. You have met, obviously go as high as you're comfortable with, but now you have met the physical prerequisites of the handstand. And the reason that you can't do a handstand is not because you're not strong enough. It's because you got to work on other shit that's not as obvious. Okay, so we got on time. We got about 20 minutes left. So now we're gonna get into the psychology of the handstand. So let's say someone is fit, they're strong enough, they have decent shoulders, they can put their hands on the floor, their wrists are in good shape, and then they put their hands on the floor, they get ready for the handstand, and something happens in their mind, and a switch turns on. So I'm going to get into a couple of those. First on the wall, then freestanding. So on the wall, a big part of the overcoming psychological restrictions is this idea of building comfort. This idea that it's a position that's uncomfortable in whatever way that you choose, whether it's fear of the unknown, fear of falling, fear of collapsing the arms. So you have to spend time there to the point that you don't really have to put much conscious thought into being there, and you can relax. And it's not it's a physical skill, so it's not eventually it's a physical relaxation, but it's a mental relaxation. So what's your mindset going into the handstand? you have to pump yourself up like a power lifter, you know, like slapping yourself in the face. If you have to do that, I don't want to say you're doing it wrong, but it's not that kind of skill. So be calm, be relaxed, gentle, methodical. So we're going to do our chest to wall handstand. I'm not going to go into form or technique, but it's this idea. You get as high as you can because you can use that as a progression. You just get as you get closer to the wall, and I'm here, I'm just going to breathe. I'm just going to take these breaths. I'm looking at the floor. I'm breathing, regular rhythm, and I'm telling myself, maybe not verbally, but like, hey, it's not so bad. Because what happens, people are scared before they get into the handstand. They're like, so they're already psyching themselves out. They get there, and then they breathe heavy, or they don't breathe at all, and there's this fear. So it's like, get into whatever, as high of a position as you can hold safely, and just spend time there, and let it breathe. Be in the moment. Like, hey, I'm in a handstand. It's not that bad. I don't have to work that hard. I just have to focus on a couple things. A little bit of push in the shoulders, straight the elbows, and I can hold myself, and it's not that bad. And what I like to use, another technique I like to use is distraction, and distraction in a very specific way. So if you consciously think about what you're trying to do, you do have to do that at some point when you're learning, but eventually, like that part of your brain is slow. The conscious part of your brain, it's not good at making decisions. You want to shift that over to the subconscious. So you want to be able to do the handstand without doing the handstand. So one exercise I like to use, it's a mental exercise. I get someone in a position where they're as high as possible, as high as is comfortable for them. And I give them a mental task. And my favorite is you just play the game of categories. So only after they're up, I'm going to give them a random category, and I'm going to say name 5 items in that category, be as specific as possible. So what does that force them to do? It forces you to breathe because you have to talk, and you want to be able to talk in a way that you can you don't sound like you're struggling, because that breath is part of it, right? If you can't breathe, you're not going to be comfortable. Forces you to use your brain, to think about some shit. But you're thinking about shit that's completely unrelated to the handstand. What happens? This becomes more automatic. You're not thinking about how much it sucks to do the handstand. You're thinking about, I want you to name 5 Japanese cars with 4-wheel drive and V6 engines. Go. Okay, I don't know. Toyota 4Runner, Honda Pilot. I don't know, whatever. It's just a random category. When you're thinking about that, the handstand is still there. But you're not thinking about the handstand anymore. Because you can't consciously think about that many things at once. The brain doesn't work like that. Even when you multitask, you're not doing 2 things at once. You're switching back and forth. So, mental tricks to build comfort in the handstand. If you're not comfortable in the position, this is like a quote I use, build comfort before complexity. You can't add more technique if you're not comfortable being there. And this is way beyond handstand. This is like, if you're not comfortable with yourself in that position, you can't move beyond it. Like I'm studying acting right now, and it's again this idea of, if you're not comfortable with yourself, you can't project anything. You can't look interesting. So same thing with back to the wall, right? You can, and we'll talk about the kick up in a little bit, but just get here. Just get here and stay there and spend time, and spend enough time that you don't have to think about what you need to do to be there. How long that takes you, I don't know, but you have to be in a relaxed mental state. You don't want to think too much. You don't want to panic. You don't want to breathe too hard. Breathing should be natural and relaxed. It shouldn't be, you don't want to hold the breath. You just want it to circulate, and treat it like meditation. Just get there and be there and enjoy the moment. All right, so that's just wall handstands, just getting comfortable, spending time, accumulating time. I don't know how long that's going to take somebody, but you have to be active about it too. It's not just about, oh, I accumulated this many minutes in the wall handstand. It's about the quality of the reps that you accumulated. So are you in the right mental state when you're doing this, right? I mean, same thing, like coming back to throwing a ball, you have to be a little bit loose. If you're tense, that might be an issue of your body, but it might be a psychological restriction of you trying to protect yourself. Because you can't really throw a ball with any kind of power if you're like this. You have to let your arm go loose. You see the photos of baseball pitchers, how far their arm goes back? There's a lot of flexibility there. But to go loose is to be open. It's to be comfortable. It's to not protect yourself. So you have to be okay with bypassing those natural protective instincts that are actually holding you back from doing the skill, because you have to think about it this way too. What's your body trying to do? What's your subconscious brain trying to do? Survive. Survive to eat another meal and pass on your genetic code. If you're in a position that your subconscious brain doesn't view as safe, it's going to start shutting you down. It's like another really good analogy, right? Your car probably has a speed limiter, meaning that the computer of your car is not going to let you accelerate past, I don't know, 110 miles per hour or something like that. Even though the body of the car can probably handle going faster with no problem, the computer doesn't let it. So you have to hack the computer. You have to show yourself consciously that what you're doing is safe, that it's not dangerous to your health. And that's part one. It's just being comfortable. Part two is where it gets interesting, is the freestanding. This is the bail. This is the exit strategy. If you don't have an exit strategy, you can't be completely safe. You got to plan for contingencies. You got to know that whatever goes wrong, you can deal with it. Because if you can't, what's going to happen? So this is not just handstands. This is life. Worry, anxiety. And it shuts you down. It paralyzes you. You can't do the thing that you want because you're afraid of what might happen. So you have to have contingencies and know that you're prepared for whatever might happen. You got the reaction to deal with it. You got the reflexes. So again, comfort building psychology drills. We're going to get into no wall now. Freestanding handstand. So drill number one. And this is also very important because I'm going to show you what it looks like when people are afraid. So this is the drill. I'm going to put the hands on the floor, arms vertical to the floor. Just take it slow, right? I have the weight of my hands. I'm not in any kind of rush. People, this is also a psychological restriction. People want to jump into it because they think that if they go faster, you don't have to deal with the fear. If you go faster, you got to deal with more shit than fear. If you want to throw yourself into it, you have to be gentle. So very simple. I'm relaxed. I'm completely relaxed, man. I put my hands down. I feel the weight in my hands. So my arms are vertical to the floor. I'm going to kick and then switch. And look at my arms. They don't go anywhere. This is somebody who's afraid of falling forward. This is very common. They lean back. Why? Because it's a safety zone. Because you know that you can always land on your feet. But you can't do a handstand like that. You have to have the arms vertical. So, and you're just going to go higher. Again, build comfort. Ah, look where I'm landing. Foot underneath the hip. Soft landing. Bah, bah, bah. I gradually go higher, but I'm always pushing down into the floor. And I keep going higher and higher, and I'm loose. I'm relaxed. I'm not tense. Because you can't have any power when you're tense. My arms are straight. I'm pushing into the floor because that's my structure. But my body is just enjoying the ride. I'm just enjoying the ride, man. It's fun. I'm looking at the floor the whole time. I'm breathing. How do you know that I'm breathing? Because I'm talking to you. Talking is like an advanced form of breathing. I suggest making noise. And I'm not even joking about that. How much time we got? 10 minutes. Oh, perfect. Good. Okay. How much time we got? 10 minutes. Yeah, we can do this in 10 minutes. Okay. So, making noise. Why? Number one, forces you to breathe. Number two, you can take the shit less seriously. You don't want to be serious about it because it's just a handstand. So what's a good noise? You can, I mean, honestly, you can make whatever noises you want, but it's also a good technique to help lighten up your perception of the skill and make sure you're breathing at the same time. So Here's another psychological restriction, and this is one that people think is strength. They think, oh, I'm not strong enough because my arms are bending. Is that why your arms are bending? Because they're not strong enough to hold you? Or are you making them bend because you're afraid of being upside down in a higher center of gravity position? I don't know. You gotta get comfortable upside down. You gotta get comfortable, but you also have to apply that technique of structural support. So this is a common one, right? They go like this, they bend the arms. Why? Because it lowers your center of gravity. But it takes a lot more strength to hold yourself like this, because now you're using a lot more muscular effort, whereas here, it's mainly bone structure that holds yourself up. So people do this. They say, how do I get stronger? My arms are always bending when I do a handstand. Stop bending your arms. How do you do that? Wow. Intent. Clarity of intent. Repeat this phrase. Very important. What are you trying to do? If I was watching you and I didn't know what you were trying to do, would it be clear to me what you were trying to do? Really simple. What is your clarity of intent? Are you trying to do a handstand? Okay. So this is happening. So what am I going to do? I'm going to put most of my focus on the arms, locking out. Maybe the kick suffers, but I stay locked out. Now it's not a factor of strength. But if it's a habit, bending the arms, you have to break the habit of building a new habit. That's more complex. That's a separate talk, completely separate talk, because that's something I'm going through myself. I'm self-taught. Learned a lot of bad habits for many years. It took me double the amount of time of learning these habits to break them. It's really complex, breaking a habit. So it's better if you can still mold yourself into creating new habits, and you have to have intention behind those habits. Your arms bend, you're not going to magically straighten when you kick up unless you focus enough energy on the elbows for enough reps that it becomes more natural. So, last thing we're going to talk about, very important, falling over, falling forward. This is your exit strategy. You will not be able to do a freestanding handstand if you don't know how to fall. Because that's the whole point of being balanced, is that you're always in a state of falling and you're always correcting it. How do you know how to correct the balance if you don't know what falling feels like? It's a sensation, it's a feedback loop. So here's the idea. I know what happens when I fall this way, and I'm feeling that, so I'm going to react, push it back the other way. So falling forward is where most people learning the handstand, especially adults, are scared, and they don't allow themselves to fully go up, to fully express what they can do in their handstand, because there's a fear holding them back. So you can think of it this way. There's a cliff edge, right? This camera is backwards. So there's the edge of a cliff. Me standing here versus standing on the edge of the cliff, there's no technical difference. My balance doesn't change, my position doesn't change. The only thing that's different is I'm closer to the edge. And what happens with most people? Stand confident, they get to the edge of the cliff, oh shit. They lean back because there's a fear of falling over. Even though there's no difference with what you're doing with your body. Now the bail is a little bit different because you actually want to experience falling off the cliff. So we got about 5 minutes. Real basic, real quick progression. Cartwheel. You should be working cartwheels. I don't care how old you are. Your kids should be working cartwheels. Your grandparents, if they can, should also be working cartwheels. Really simple. Cartwheel is an extension of falling. I have to feel what it's like to fall and gain that momentum. So what happens? I fall. Eventually, I have to take a step. That's a reflex. That's a reaction. That's why I'm confident standing up. Because if you push me, I know that I can right myself. Cartwheel is the same thing. You just do it on your hands. So I'm falling forward. I turn my hands 90 degrees. So if I'm going this way, my hands go 90 degrees. I kick my back leg. Just like that. Simple. Eventually, you get your legs higher. You go more from standing. Get a better momentum. Getting real confident with cartwheels, because cartwheel is not a static pose. you're falling until you get back to your feet. So I'm falling and then I'm back on my feet and I come up. So you want to get real confident and comfortable with cartwheels. Find a nice patch of grass. Just make sure that you can do them, because that's going to be the handstand bailout. That's going to be the reflex. And if you're scared, take it as slow as you need to. You break it down. You go hands, 90 degrees, 1, 2, kick. Do it again. Bah, bah, kick a little bit higher. Bah, bah, a little bit faster. Bah, connect it. Take the progressions, but again, get comfortable. Get to the point that if you were to push me over, I can just, that's a natural thing. I don't know if that wasn't in frame. That's a natural thing for me to just right myself by cartwheeling, because it's just an extension of taking a step. So connecting that to the handstand. You're gonna have your hands, fingers facing forward. You're gonna go 1, 2, come down. So this is my leg that I'm gonna kick with. I'm not gonna switch sides for now. Then I'm gonna go 1, land, turn my hands, cartwheel. I didn't stand up, so just one progression. Another progression that I can do is I kick and I land off to the side, but I land a little bit more forward than the line of my hands. So I want to get used to going over. When I do these, very important, I'm looking at the floor the whole time. I always see the floor. I don't look away. If you look away, that's a flinch reflex. What happens in a boxing match when you go like this? You get knocked unconscious, because now you don't have any visual stimulus to know how to react and defend yourself. So worst thing you can do in your handstand bailouts as a beginner is to go like that. That's, believe it or not, that's actually a flinch reflex for the handstand. Look at the floor the whole time. So I go a little bit higher. Handstand, a little bit faster. And then this is eventually what I want to see, is it's a transformation. I kick to my handstand, I feel the fall, I get that oh shit moment, like, oh fuck, I'm gonna fall. But then you keep looking at the floor and you turn it into a cartwheel. My eyes never left the floor, right? So it's not scary. It's like I hit this tipping point, this moment that I know that I've gone too far, and then it's I go slow at first. I take the necessary progressions to feel what it is I need to do consciously, and then you get to that point that it's a reflex. When my handstand, I'm like, oh shit, I lost control. Oh, but it's okay. It doesn't matter that I lost control, because I know what I can do. And then I have confidence in doing the handstand at any point on any surface safely, because it's not an issue. I can always land on my feet, and then I'm not hesitating. I'm not holding myself back. One more thing before we call it. You can also do the same thing against the wall, but you want it to be real. So this is like the fake version, right? I turn my hand, I kick the leg down, that's controlled. That's not a fall, that's an illustration of a fall, but it's not the fall itself. That's the map, but it's not the territory. So but get comfortable, but what I want is that it's a reflex. Like, fall, like when I do like that, I'm waiting until I'm actually out of control. So that's more advanced. But point is, I'm out of breath now. That's basically the class. I can keep going for a long time, but I got a lot of other stuff I need to do today, and I'm back on set later today, working on a few movies this week. So I can stay on for another couple minutes if anybody has any questions. Public chat. But yeah, hopefully you learned something from my my underslept and overcaffeinated rants. And again, to me, it's not about handstands. Like, I'm not gonna go so far as say I don't give a shit about your handstand, but I'm not trying to develop hand balancers. I'm trying to develop people who are self-aware in their own learning process, and I'm using handstand as a tool, as a vehicle towards being able to achieve that. That's all it is. Like, it doesn't matter if you can do a handstand or not. What matters is what you learn from that process that you can apply to something else. So yeah, hopefully, this is my goal as a teacher,
It's not for you to do the skills. It's for you to think differently about the skills, about yourself, about life, about the world. Then I've succeeded. Because when I can change somebody's perception, that's permanent. The good teachers that I've had in my life, it wasn't like, oh yeah, they taught me to do this trick and now I'm the life of the party. It was like they changed the way I see the world because of one thing they said that completely blew my mind, and that was a permanent change. After that specific note, after that specific lesson, my whole outlook changed. Like that's the deep teaching for me, and that's kind of what I try to go after as much as I can, and trying to keep it interesting for myself. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoying the class. I'll stay on for like 2 more minutes if there's any other questions that you guys had. Hopefully the audio was good. I know I had a little bit of technical difficulties setting up. Where is it? This thing, this little lav mic. Pretty nice having this microphone because then you don't have to deal with the room echo. I don't have to project my voice. I can save my speech, my words. But yeah, as long as the quality is good. Cool. But yeah, I think I got some work to do and then probably take a nap. But how do I stop the recording? Pause recording, boom. Yes.